Jessie tapped her wine glass with the back of a spoon. The sound cut through Thanksgiving dinner so sharply that even the children at the far end of the table stopped talking. "I think we need to address something uncomfortable," she said. I looked up from my plate. My sister was standing at the head of the table like she was about to make a toast, except she wasn't smiling. Then I noticed Aunt Carol looking down. My cousin shifted in his chair. Jessie's husband leaned back with a strange little grin. They already knew. Jessie turned toward me. "Thea, we voted." I stared at her. She let the silence stretch. "You're not family anymore." For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Jessie's husband started clapping. 2 relatives joined him. A few others followed, some cheering awkwardly, others smiling like they had just witnessed something brave instead of cruel. I looked toward my mother. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom." Her fingers tightened around her napkin. My father stared at his plate. That was when I understood this hadn't happened tonight. They had discussed me beforehand. They had voted without me. And then they had invited me to Thanksgiving so Jessie could announce the verdict in front of everyone. Jessie folded her arms. "You've become distant finer. Everything with you is about money now. Who paid for what? Who owes what? What you're willing to contribute." I almost laughed. Behind her was the section of ceiling I had paid to repair after water damage. The heating system humming beneath the floor had been replaced with my money. The table everyone was eating from had been my anniversary gift to our parents. And that morning, I had received an email reminding me that the property insurance renewal was due. Nobody mentioned any of that. Instead, Aunt Carol looked at me and said, "Maybe this will teach you some humility." Jessie picked up a cream-colored envelope and slid it across the table. I opened it. Inside was a tight statement saying that by majority agreement, I would no longer participate in family decisions. I set the paper down. Jessie watched me carefully. She wanted tears or shouting. Maybe she expected me to beg. Instead, I asked, "Everyone agreed to this?" My mother finally looked at me. Her voice was barely audible. "It's for the best." I turned to Dad. He cleared his throat. "Your sister handled it badly. But the family made a decision. You should respect the majority." Something inside me went completely still. "All right." Jessie blinked. That's it. That's it." I reached beside my chair and lifted the thick folder I had carried into the house that afternoon. Jessie's smirk returned. "What's that?" "Your defense." I laughed softly. "No." I placed the folder in the center of the Thanksgiving table. "Then you won't need this." I pushed it toward her. Jessie opened it with the confidence of someone who still believed she controlled the room. She glanced at the first page. Her smile weakened. She turned to the second, then the third. Across the table, my cousin leaned forward. "What is it?" Jessie didn't answer. Her eyes moved faster across the page, then stopped. Her fingers tightened around the papers. "Jessie," my mother whispered. For the first time all evening, my sister looked afraid. And as the same relatives who had just cheered my removal leaned toward that folder, one question hung over the Thanksgiving table. What had Jessie just discovered that made throwing me out of the family suddenly look like a terrible mistake? 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Jessie had called me while I was leaving work. "Mom wants the upstairs bathroom redone," she said without even saying hello. I stopped beside my car. "Redone how?" "New tiles, new cabinets, better lighting. The whole thing is something broken." There was a pause. "No, but it's old, so it's cosmetic." Jessie sighed loudly. "Fina, not everything has to be an emergency before you help." That sentence told me exactly where the conversation was going. For years, there had always been something. Dad's insurance payment, a repair bill, a family holiday nobody had budgeted for, a broken appliance, a sudden expense. Jessie would describe as urgent until I paid it. At first, I rarely argued. Helping my parents felt natural. But somewhere along the way, helping Mom and Dad had turned into funding whatever the rest of the family decided was important. "I'm not paying for a bathroom renovation that nobody needs," I said. Jessie went quiet. Then her voice hardened. "You think having money means you get to decide everything?" "No. I think having my money means I get to decide what I spend it on." That attitude right there is the problem. I unlocked my car. "What problem?" "People are noticing how different you've become." That made me stop. People. Jessie gave a short laugh. You really don't see it, do you? You used to care about family. Before I could answer, she hung up. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern changed. Relatives who used to call just to talk suddenly disappeared. But the request didn't. A cousin texted asking whether I could cover part of a repair. An aunt wanted help with a holiday expense. Jessie sent me another message about the bathroom and acted offended when I ignored it. Then Mom called. Her voice sounded wrong from the moment she said hello. Are you coming for Thanksgiving? I was planning to. Oh, good. I frowned. You sound nervous. I'm not nervous, Mom. I just think everyone being together will be good. There was something she wasn't saying. The next morning, Jessie sent the official invitation. Not her usual casual message, not dinner at 6 o'clock, bring dessert. Instead, it read, Thanksgiving dinner. Thursday, everyone needs to be there. Please don't make other plans. I read it twice. Then I called my attorney. 2 days later, I sat across from him in his office while he opened a file we had not discussed in years. You want complete, updated copies? He asked. Yes. Everything. Everything. He studied me. Has something happened with your parents? Not exactly. Then why now? I looked down at the documents on his desk. I think my family is planning some kind of intervention. About what? Money. He leaned back. And you want these with you? I hope I never need to take them out of the folder. He nodded slowly. But you want the option. By Thanksgiving morning, the folder was sitting inside my bag. I still didn't know what Jessie had planned. I thought maybe the family would pressure me to start paying for things again. Maybe they would accuse me of being selfish. I was prepared for an argument. I was not prepared to hear that they had voted me out of the family. Now, back at the Thanksgiving table, Jessie flipped through several more pages. Payment records, dates, amounts, years of expenses. Her face tightened. What exactly is this supposed to prove? She asked. I said nothing. Jessie scanned another page, then another. Her breathing changed. Before anyone else could see what she was holding, she slammed the folder shut. That's enough. My cousin frowned. What's enough? Jessie stood quickly and grabbed the folder with both hands. I said, this is enough. She turned as if she intended to carry it out of the room. I reached into my bag. Jessie stopped. I placed a second identical folder on the table. Her face went pale. I made copies. Put that away, Finner. Jessie was still clutching the first folder against her chest when I opened the second one. No. Her eyes narrowed. This is Thanksgiving. Nobody wants one of your financial presentations. That's strange, I said. A few minutes ago, everyone wanted to discuss how obsessed with money I supposedly am. Aunt Carol leaned forward. What's in those papers? Nothing that concerns you, Jessie snapped. My cousin frowned. Then why are you trying to hide them? That question changed the room. Jessie had spent the evening controlling who spoke, what was said, and what everyone believed about me. Now people were looking past her. She dropped the folder onto the table. This is exactly what Finer does. She waves money around whenever she wants control. I'm not trying to buy my way back into this family. Jessie gave a bitter laugh. Then what are you doing? I'm making sure everyone understands what they just voted to reject. I removed several copies of a financial summary from my folder and passed them down the table. Jessie stared at me. Fina let them read. The room became quiet except for paper moving between hands. Aunt Carol's expression changed first. What is this insurance payment? The house. She looked at Mom. You told me that was handled. It was, I said, by me. My cousin pointed out another line. And this heating system? I paid for it. The ceiling repair me. The emergency property expenses also me. Jessie interrupted. So what? You helped Mom and Dad. Congratulations. I turned toward her. That's not what you told them though, is it? Nobody spoke. I looked at my mother. Mom, when Dad had financial problems, who covered the overdue expenses connected to this house? Mom glanced at Jessie. That tiny movement was enough. Aunt Carol noticed it. Why are you looking at Jessie? More than we could have managed ourselves. Jessie pushed her chair backward. This is ridiculous. I kept my eyes on Mom. Why didn't anyone know? Mom looked down. Jessie thought it would be better if we didn't discuss it. Every face turned toward my sister. Jessie froze. Dad finally looked up. Jessie told us it might create problems if everyone knew how much you were doing. What problems? My cousin asked. Jessie folded her arms. I didn't want Fina becoming the center of everything just because she had money. Aunt Carol stared at her. You told us Fina barely helped your parents anymore. I said she was becoming selfish while she was paying all this. Jessie's jaw tightened. You don't understand the dynamic. I think I'm beginning to, Aunt Carol replied. Only minutes earlier she had told me I needed humility. Now she couldn't look at me. Jessie turned toward the rest of the table. None of this changes what we voted on. Paying bills doesn't make somebody family. I nodded. Exactly. Jessie blinked. I gathered the financial summaries into a neat stack, which is why your vote made my decision very simple. What decision? Starting today, every voluntary payment I've been making stops. Mom's head lifted. I continued. No more covering extra household expenses. No more paying for family gatherings. No more emergency transfers to relatives. No more renovations. Jessie decides somebody else should finance. Jessie laughed, but there was no confidence behind it. Fine. Mom and Dad managed before you started acting like their personal bank. Dad didn't respond. He had taken the second folder and was quietly turning through the pages. Jessie continued. We'll manage perfectly well without you. Dad suddenly stopped turning pages. His hand rested on one document near the back. I watched the color drain from his face. Dad, Mom said. He didn't answer her. Instead, he looked around the dining room, at the ceiling, at the walls, then finally at me. His voice was barely above a whisper. Fine. Jessie turned. Dad lifted the document. Did you bring the deed? The deed. Jessie stared at Dad as if he had spoken the wrong word. What deed? 3 people began talking at once. Aunt Carol leaned across the table. A deed to what? Jessie grabbed the edge of Dad's document. Dad, what are you talking about? He pulled it away from her. I remained seated. Jessie turned on me. Answer the question. You were happy making announcements 5 minutes ago. I said, let Dad finish reading. Her face tightened. This is Mom and Dad's house. They've owned it for decades. I looked directly at her. They did. The word landed harder than anything else I could have said. Jessie stopped moving. Did. Mom closed her eyes. Dad lowered the document. That was when Aunt Carol looked between our parents and me. What happened to this house? Nobody answered immediately. Years earlier, Dad had gone through serious financial trouble. The family knew some of it. They knew money had become tight. They knew Mom had started cutting expenses and Dad had been making frantic phone calls. What they didn't know was how close things had come to disaster. Eventually, everyone had been told the problem was handled. Jessie had spent years presenting that period as proof that she was the daughter who kept the family together. At birthdays and holidays, she loved reminding people when Dad was struggling. I was the one keeping everybody calm. She had kept them calm, but she hadn't solved the problem. I had. Mom finally spoke. Fina protected us. Jessie whipped around. Protected you from what? Mom stared at the table. We were close to losing the house. Aunt Carol gasped. Jessie shook her head. No. Dad fixed that. Dad looked at her. No, Jessie. The room went silent. You told me everything worked out. It did. Dad glanced at me. Because of your sister. Jessie looked back at the papers for the first time. She wasn't arguing. She was calculating, trying to fit this new information into the story she had told everyone for years. I looked at my parents. You asked me not to tell anyone what happened. Mom nodded. You were embarrassed. Dad lowered his head. I gave you my word. I kept it. Jessie scoffed. Oh, please. Now you're acting noble. I turned toward her. No, I'm explaining why you were able to tell everyone I was selfish without anyone knowing enough to question you. Jessie pushed away from the table. Whatever happened years ago has nothing to do with tonight. It has everything to do with tonight. How? Because you stood up inside this house and held a vote about whether I deserve to belong here. My uncle, who had barely spoken all evening, looked at Jessie. Did you know they nearly lost the house? I knew Dad had financial problems and you knew Fina fixed them. No. Jesse looked toward our parents. They never told me. I pointed at the folder. The answer is sitting right there. Jesse reached across Dad and took the document. This time he let her. She began reading. Her eyes moved down the page. Mom watched me instead. There was fear in her expression now. Not embarrassment. Fear. Fina, she whispered. I turned toward her. Are you going to make us leave? Every conversation stopped. Jesse's head snapped up. My cousin lowered his paper. Dad stared at me. Suddenly, everyone understood that this wasn't just about old bills or embarrassing family secrets. There was a reason Mom had asked that question. I opened my mouth to answer. Jesse slammed the document onto the table. You can't throw us out of our own house. I'm not throwing Mom and Dad out. Jesse stood frozen beside the table. I looked directly at her, and it isn't your house. Nobody moved. I reached for the document Jesse had slammed down and turned it so everyone could see the heading. Years ago when Dad's financial problems got worse. This house was in serious danger. Dad lowered his eyes. I continued. Mom and Dad tried to fix it. They couldn't get enough financing. By the time they told me how bad things were, their options were disappearing. Jessie shook her head. So you gave them money. I tapped the document. I bought the house. Aunt Carol's mouth fell open. My cousin leaned closer. Jessie stared at me. What? It was a legal sale. Properly documented. The deed was transferred into my name. Jessie snatched the paper again. I let her. She could read it 100 times. The words weren't going to change. Mom wiped her eyes. I continued. I had the savings and credit to make it work. Mom and Dad didn't want the rest of the family knowing how close they had come to losing their home, so we agreed to keep the arrangement private. Dad finally spoke. Fine, never asked us to leave. No, I said, and I never intended to. I removed another document. This is the occupancy agreement. Mom and Dad have the right to remain here for the rest of their lives without paying me rent. Mom covered her mouth. The fear in her face disappeared, replaced by something heavier. I turned through the remaining pages. Property taxes, insurance, major repairs. Those were my responsibility as the owner. Then there were the other things I chose to pay for voluntarily. I pointed around the dining room. The ceiling repair. Another page. The heating system. Another. Extra household expenses, family gatherings, emergency transfers. Things I never announced because I thought helping family didn't require an audience. Aunt Carol slowly pushed the typed family statement away from my plate. Jessie noticed. Don't do that, she snapped. Aunt Carol looked at her. You told her she barely helped. I said she was selfish. You let us vote based on that. Jessie's face reddened. She could have told everyone. And humiliated Mom and Dad, I asked. Jessie turned toward me. You hid this because you knew one day you could use it against us. I almost laughed. For years, she said nothing. For years, Jessie, I owned this house and never mentioned it. I never charged Mom and Dad rent. I never demanded credit. I sat through family dinners while you called yourself the person holding everyone together. Jessie opened her mouth. I didn't let her interrupt. I brought these papers tonight because I knew something was happening. The call stopped unless someone needed money. Mom became nervous every time Thanksgiving came up. Then you sent me an invitation saying everyone needed to be here. I closed the folder. I thought you were planning to pressure me into paying for more things. My eyes moved around the table. I didn't know you were planning to vote me out of the family. Dad rubbed a hand across his face. Thinner. No, Dad. He stopped. The house isn't what hurt me. My voice remained steady. I watched people applaud. Nobody looked at me now. I watched my aunt clap after telling me I needed humility. I watched Mom refuse to look at me. And I watched you sit there while Jessie announced that your daughter wasn't family anymore. Dad's eyes filled. I should have stopped it. Yes, I was trying to avoid another argument. You avoided an argument by letting her humiliate me. He nodded slowly. That was cowardly. Mom began crying. I'm sorry. I looked at her. I believe you're sorry now, but I'm not going to pretend tonight didn't happen just because everyone knows the truth. Jessie dropped the deed onto the table. So what happens now? Mom and Dad stay here. Mom looked up. The occupancy agreement doesn't change. Dad exhaled. but everything voluntary does. Jesse's expression hardened again. What does that mean? It means no more paying relatives' personal bills. No more financing holidays because somebody else planned something they couldn't afford. No more emergency transfers every time someone calls me. And definitely no bathroom renovation because you decided mom needed prettier tiles. A few people shifted uncomfortably. If this family wants extras, I said, the family can pay for them. Jesse gave a bitter laugh. So this is punishment. No, this is me respecting your vote. That silenced her. You said I'm not family. Fine. Then my bank account isn't family property either. The consequences became obvious faster than anyone expected. In the weeks after Thanksgiving, requests still came. I simply stopped saying yes. The next family gathering was smaller because nobody volunteered to cover what I normally paid. A repair Jessie insisted was urgent suddenly became something that could wait when she had to contribute toward it herself. Several relatives apologized. Aunt Carol called me first. I shouldn't have joined that vote. No, you shouldn't have. I believed Jessie. You also never asked me. She went quiet. That mattered more to me than her apology. I accepted apologies that seemed sincere. But I didn't restore relationships overnight. Regret wasn't the same thing as trust. Jessie had the hardest adjustment. For years, she had been the family's unofficial authority. If Jessie said someone was wrong, people assumed she knew the full story. That ended after Thanksgiving. People started asking questions. They checked facts. They stopped automatically taking her side. Eventually, even mom and dad stopped allowing her to speak for them. When Jessie tried convincing them to pressure me into restoring the financial arrangement, Dad refused. You created this, he told her. We all allowed your resentment toward Finer to become family policy. A few months later, Jessie came to see me alone. What do you want? She asked. I stared at her. What? An apology? Everyone to admit you were right. Control of the house? Control of mom and dad? What is it? Nothing. She frowned. That's the part you still don't understand. I didn't want Jessie's position in the family. I didn't want people seeking my permission instead of hers. I didn't even want to prove I belonged anymore. I had spent too many years believing generosity could make people value me. Thanksgiving cured me of that. I kept the house. Selling it would have punished my parents for something Jessie started, and I had never rescued their home to hold it over their heads. Mom and Dad remained there under exactly the same protection I had promised years earlier. But our relationship changed. I visited because I wanted to, not because guilt told me I should. I spent holidays with people who were happy I had arrived before they knew what I had brought. My money became mine again. Months later, Mom and I were sitting in the same dining room when she asked me something quietly. Do you think this family will ever be what it was before Thanksgiving? I looked at the table where Jessie had once stood and announced that everyone had voted me out. I hope not. Mom looked surprised. What we had before only worked when I stayed useful, quiet, and forgiving. I don't want that back. She reached across the table and took my hand. This time, I didn't need an apology. I already knew what my boundaries were. That folder had proven I owned a house. But Thanksgiving taught me something far more valuable. They voted that I wasn't family anymore. But that Thanksgiving taught me something they never expected. Family was never supposed to be something I had to keep paying to belong.